Chef Michael Katz. I am your new executive chef here at Naples Yacht Club. This is day 2. In light of the circumstances going on in this world, as unfortunate as they are, fortunately we have the technology to be able to do this for you. I know you have a book club meeting coming up on Friday. I know you're discussing a book, and I have it written down here just in case I forgot, next year in Havana. We're doing a couple of recipes that are Cuban food-inspired recipes coming from a restaurant that you've selected for me called the Columbia Restaurant. I know there's 7 locations throughout the state of Florida, I believe. I've been to 2 of them personally. It's a fantastic restaurant. I tried to do some research last night about why it was called Columbia Restaurant when they serve Cuban food, and I just could not get down to the bottom of it. So if anybody has any insight on that, I'd love for you to share that with me. I'd love to hear that. But started by a Cuban immigrant, the oldest restaurant in the state of Florida. The food is fantastic. I know a lot of it is served tableside, especially the salad that we're going to prepare today. The soup is obviously made in advance, but it's a wonderful, wonderful soup. We're going to show you every step along the way. I'm going to give you some tricks, some tidbits, some information. I'm going to show you how to do things that you probably have no interest in knowing in the first place, but that'll be super fun. Just a little background on the kitchen. You can see that things are wrapped up and things are put away. We're being extremely careful on how we produce food. I'm doing a demonstration today, and nobody's going to be touching this food, so I don't have gloves on and I don't have a mask on. But when we're producing all of our food here in the kitchen, we have a couple things to show you that are keeping you safe. Number one is this little red bucket that I have right in front of me. This little red bucket is, we call it the Sani bucket in the kitchen, but it's a sanitation bucket, and in that bucket is a quaternary sanitizer with 200 to 400 parts per million of quaternary sanitizer mixed with water at the right ratio, and every once in a while we wipe down our workstation, we wipe down our knives, we wipe down areas that food have touched. If you guys want to do that at home, you can take that bucket or something like this bucket right here, and you can put a couple of capfuls of bleach into, like say, a gallon of water, and you can use that to wipe down your station or your sink or your knives, and it'll do the very, very same thing. And you won't have that taste of bleach flavor, so you'll be good with that. You'll also notice there's plastic around all these dishes and on these cabinets right here. We've sealed off all of the containers that are not disposable. So everything that we have that we're using right now, besides of course the containers that we use for production, are all disposable. We also wear gloves during production, and we wear face masks during production. We make sure that we stay at least 6 feet apart from each other. We're doing everything that we possibly can to take the right precautions to make sure that we do not spread the virus here in the kitchen, and we don't send it home with you also. So a lot of things that we're doing very, very differently. And as I told my team in my onboarding here, the food and service industry is going to be very, very different when we do finally reopen. There's going to be things that we've never done before. There's going to be precautions that we take in the future. So a lot of things are actually going to be good as a result of this. I know it's a terrible time. Anyway, enough about me, enough about what it is that we're doing here in the kitchen. I know you're excited about what we're about to make. So I got 3 things that we're going to make today. First of all, we're going to make a soup. It's called the Columbia Spanish bean soup, Columbia Restaurant Spanish bean soup, and it's garbanzo beans, and it's chorizo sausage, and it's potatoes, and it's salt pork and onions. Outstanding, home style, comforting. We're also going to make a salad, which is really iconic for the Columbia Restaurant, and this is a salad that they do tableside. They do it slightly different at the restaurant because I've ordered the salad before and I've seen what they do, but I'm going to show you a little tip or tricks to do it a little bit easier at home. And then the third thing that we're going to do is we're going to make something called tostones. Personal favorite of mine. They're twice fried plantains, so we'll get to all 3 of those recipes. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with the soup. Okay, so for our soup, there's a little bit of advanced preparation that we have to do. What I have here is I have dried garbanzo beans. They're also known as chickpeas. Almost 10 times out of 10, you don't have anything to worry about with these beans. But just to be sure, what I do is I spill them out onto a tray. This is a half a pound of beans. And I just basically look through them to make sure that there's no foreign, funny looking things in here. This bean actually looks a little bit suspect, so we'll get rid of that bean right there. But what you're looking for is you're looking for debris, you're looking for rocks, you're looking for things that just don't belong here. These beans look pretty good. What we're going to do is we're going to soak these overnight. So the easiest way to soak them, take a container like this, put your beans in, and we're going to cover them with water. How much water? 2 inches above the beans. Okay, that's enough. If you want to go 3 inches above the beans, great. If you want to go 12 inches above the beans, that's awesome, but that would be a waste of water. But if you're 2 inches above the beans, I think you're good. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put a pinch of salt in the beans. Okay, this is a chef pinch of salt. Okay, so if I ever say pinch, that's a chef pinch right there. I'm even going to throw another one in for good luck. Okay. Your recipe calls for about a teaspoon or so. It's just, the salt here is not really flavoring the beans. I did a lot of research on this because there's some conflicting information on salt and beans. Some people say that if you add salt to the beans in the cooking process, what it actually does is it toughens the beans, or it will, the term is retarding. It retards the cooking of the beans and it slows the process. But as I did further research, salt, just like you would suspect, actually breaks down the skins of the beans and causes them to cook a little bit faster. So step one is done. So we're going to set this aside. 24 hours is best, or overnight is good too. But I just wanted to show you, this one's been soaking overnight, and you can already see the difference in the beans. I tell the people that I work with, and I used to tell my students at the CIA, that you can actually watch the beans on the counter. They go that fast. But a full 12 hours overnight is best, and what that does for the beans is it softens them, it breaks them down a little bit with the salt that you've added, and it also evens them. So not every bean in that collection is exactly the same size, so they're going to cook extremely evenly when you put them into the pot, so one is not a little bit harder than the other. All right, so these have been cooking overnight. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of its water. A lot of people will also say, hey chef, what are you doing? Why are you wasting that water? There's a couple of very good reasons for this, and I hate to bring this up, but have you ever noticed that sometimes beans make you a little gassy? Well, there's good reason for that. Beans have a special enzyme in them that comes out in the softening process. And if you were to use that water, you would notice that your stomach is a little bit more rumbly than normal because a lot of that enzyme is in that water. So you want to discard that water and you want to start with fresh water. So we're going to put our beans now in our pot. The recipe calls for 2 quarts of water. So we're going to add our 2 quarts in. We're going to turn the stove on. What we want to do is we want to bring this up to a simmer. I'm not adding any more salt at this point. The salt was already in the water. Some of that salt has transferred into the garbanzo bean. So we're just going to leave that be. And the reason being is because there's going to be some ingredients that I'm going to use later, like the chorizo, like the salt pork, that are going to add a little bit of extra salt to the pot as well. So we're going to let it go. We're going to season it to the end if we need to. Also to this pot, we're going to add a beef bone. Okay, this is a beef bone cut off of a ribeye. Okay, any beef bone will work. I like to tell people when you buy meats from the store and you have a bone that comes with it, just save it. Put it in a Ziploc bag, put it in the freezer, and you'll have it for the next time you need to do something like this. In addition to the beef bone, the recipe calls for ham bones. Okay, ham bones can be translated into a couple of different ways. The ham is actually the hind leg of a pig. it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the ham that you put on your table. It's just the hind leg. So it could be translated into a raw pork bone from the ham, or it could also be a smoky pork bone left over from dinner last night. It all depends on what level of flavor you want in this soup. This soup is designed to use a raw ham bone. I don't have a ham bone. This is not a ham bone. This is just a pork bone, and it'll work just as fine. So I have a couple of them. I'm going to put this in here. And what's going to wind up happening is, as this comes up to a simmer, the proteins from both the beans and from the bones are going to start to coagulate. What that means is the proteins solidify when they reach a certain temperature. That temperature is exactly 165 degrees. So even before you see simmer, you're going to see little clouds of, I like to call them scum. It's just scum that comes up to the surface. It looks gross. You want to skim that off the surface as it starts to come up. The more you skim, and I'm going to show you that technique of skim, the more you skim, the less cloudy and the more clear your final broth is going to be in the end. If that doesn't matter to you, then don't bother. But it's definitely something that you want to take off during the cooking process. Okay. So we have a couple more things to do. We have some onions to cook, and it calls for a whole Spanish onion. This is a Spanish onion. It's your yellow onion. When you go to the grocery store, please make sure that it says Spanish onion, because there are ones that look like this, but they're sweet onions. And we're not really looking to add a whole lot of sweetness to this dish. It would really change the flavor, I think, for the worse. So Spanish onion. The way to work with a Spanish onion, number one, what you want to do is you want to take these little hairs off. Okay, the little hairs are the kind of things that get on your cutting board, and they can get mixed up into your onions, and you don't want to eat these little things. So I like to take those off first, and then any loose fragments, those can come off at the same time as well. Okay, so now what we're going to do, we're going to hold our onion like this. Okay, so we have our root end towards the left. If you're a righty. If you're a lefty, you're on your own. Okay, so the root end is to the left. The stem end is going to be to the right. You're going to hold your knife, and here's how I hold my knife. By the way, I have 3 fingers on the handle here. My index finger is on top, right here, and my thumb is always going to be on the left-hand side. Okay, you're never going to hold your knife like this. You're never going to hold your knife from here. The reason that we choke up a little bit and we hold it here is because we have a whole lot more control of the knife when we do some cutting. If you think about it, if your knife is here, your knife can flex from left to right very, very easily. But if your fingers are here, you have a whole lot more control, and it's not going to do that. All right, this hand, much more important, okay, because this is the hand that fingers come off. So this one's always going to be here. Okay, so if you think about it, when your knife is down here on the cutting board, this is kind of like in the woodworking industry, we call this the fence. Okay, this is the guard. And if your hand is up against the knife, it's never going to get lost. So if your knife starts creeping towards your fingers, fingertips are going to come off. But if your hand is always here and you're moving with the knife, you're always going to be in control. Now that takes practice. Okay, it's not going to be the first day that you're great at that. And your thumb, obviously, you want to hide it behind your index finger on your opposite hand. So as you're cutting, you're up against your knuckles, and you use that as a guide to not hurt yourself. So here, a little bit more difficult because you have something round. It's always dangerous when it's round. So we're gonna change that. So my fingers are up here. My knife is here up against my knuckles, and we're gonna cut down right here. What that does is it creates a more balanced surface. Okay, now I have a little bit of an easier time. So what I'm going to do now is the cut end is down, the knife is going to come through the root end, right down here, and now I have a much easier time with my onion. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to peel the brown part off. Sometimes a little easier said than done. Okay, after you do that, you want to wipe down your surface one more time. Think about it. There was stuff on the outside of that onion. Okay, you have no idea what was there. Maybe it was in the grocery store. Maybe some other people have touched it. Okay, Wipe down your work surface after you cut your onion. Wipe down your knife. Dry your hands. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to do something called mincing. Okay, this can be done in a couple of different ways. Since we're going to be mincing and we're going to be rough chopping, the thing with mincing is you want to reduce the amount of chopping that you do on the onion. The more you chop it, the more water that gets squeezed out of it. And if you think about it, onions do have a certain level of sugar in them. Okay, and the more juice you squeeze out of every onion, the more likely you're going to burn something. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to run our knife parallel just once. Then we're going to cut like this. Now this is a big onion. Calls for one onion, but this is a big one. We're just going to use one, half. Okay, that'll be enough. And then we're going to go against all those cuts. And we get a nice, even dice, I like to call it. Okay, what I like to do is, at the end here, lay it down, get a little extra from the sides, and that's about as much as you can get from an onion. Now to mince it and to make it, you can use the onions just like they are right here. It's completely up to you. It's your soup. But if you want to make them just a little bit smaller, just take your knife and run through the onions really quickly. So the way to do that, hold your knife right here on the end, hold your knife right here on the other end, and just go through. Okay, just to break them down a little bit smaller. And I like to use this tool right here. It cost me $1.50. It's an easy way to gather up all your onions or whatever it is that you have on your board, and an easy way to transfer them into the pot that you're going to be using also. Okay, this is actually, it's called a bowl scraper if anybody wants to buy one of these on Amazon. Amazon is the busiest store in the world right now, so I'm sure they have it. Okay, salt pork. So salt pork, I'm moving out of the view of the camera for a moment because I had my salt pork in the freezer for a little while. Now I didn't want it frozen, I just wanted it to be very, very solid and extremely cold. And then after I had it in the freezer, just so it didn't lose any temperature, I put it in the refrigerator. The reason that I did that was because it's so much easier to cut when it's super cold. Now we want thin little strips of salt pork. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut slices. Now salt pork is exactly what it sounds like. It's salted pork, and it's pork belly, so it's just like bacon, but it's really, really heavily salted. It's not the kind of ingredient that you would just eat on its own. It's the ingredient that makes a really good starter or background flavor. All right, and then it calls for it to be cut into thin strips. Now you decide what those thin strips look like, okay? They could be strips that go this long, they could be strips that go this long. I think this long is probably going to be better for your soup. And the easiest way to do that is to take a couple of those pieces that you've done, to pile them up on top of each other, and then just to go across. And you can get some nice, beautiful thin strips. Once you get down to the end, it gets a little bit more tricky, but just be careful and you'll be fine. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to move our salt pork into a saute pan. So once again, we can use our nifty bowl scraper to move that in. And what we're looking for is the salt pork to start what we call rendering. Okay, what that means by rendering is it's starting to heat up, it's starting to fry a little bit, and the fat is starting to come away from the meat. If you see that it's starting to go a little bit fast and you're getting a little bit of browning before the fat starts to separate, turn the heat down. Don't be afraid to use a little heat control at home. My dad is the best example of someone who doesn't follow that direction. Everything is high all the time, barbecue, stove, and that's why he burns a lot of things. But you got to be confident enough to control that heat. Okay, so while the salt pork is rendering, and you can see it's starting to release a little bit of fat, and you can also see there's a little bit of browning going on in the bottom of the pan. I don't really want it to go a whole lot more than that, because I don't want the salt pork to be crispy. I just want it to render. Crispy introduces a whole new flavor that I'm not looking for. But I do want to point out that the garbanzo beans and the bones are starting to do what I've asked them to do. I'm going to lower the temperature now because it's coming up to a boil. So what I want to do is I want to reduce that back to a simmer. And all this white foam on the top, that's that scum that I was talking to you about earlier. That's coagulated proteins. And you can see that the broth is somewhat cloudy. As those proteins continue to come up to the surface, and as I continue to take those off, you'll see that the broth will actually clarify. So just take a spoon that has some holes in it, like this, a slotted spoon, and then just dip it into cold ice water. And then just keep taking all those little bits off the surface. You'll notice that you'll take it off the surface, and then a couple minutes later it'll come back again. So you want to just continue to do that. All right, this is where I want it to be. I'm going to add my onions into my salt pork. And we're going to saute the onions until what I like to say is translucent. Okay, and what that means is they're opaque when we start, can't really see through them, but as they start to soften, you can see some light through the onions. They start to soften, they look a little bit more glossy. That's exactly where you want the onions to be. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do after the onions have had a chance to saute lightly, just a few minutes or so, we're going to go ahead and we're going to transfer the salt pork and the onions into the soup. Another couple of things that we want to add at the same time. We're going to add half a teaspoon of Spanish paprika. You want to be careful. There's a lot of different kinds of paprikas out there. There's a lot of choices. If it says fancy paprika, it's not what you're looking for. If it says Spanish paprika, there's a couple of different choices on Spanish paprika. You have to make sure that it's not a hot variety of Spanish paprika. You want the sweet paprika. If it just says Spanish paprika on it, you're probably good. Half a teaspoon, once again, here's the chef's half a teaspoon. Okay, if you want to measure it, please, by all means. A pinch of saffron, whatever you can get in between those three fingers comfortably. And then what I like to do is, over the pot, just rub it with my fingers. What that does is it opens up the oils and the spices a little bit in the saffron threads. Couple more ingredients that we need to add. We need 2 potatoes. I wanted to show you a couple things about potatoes. Now I have 2 potatoes that I've already peeled. I've chosen russet potatoes. There's ups and downs to choosing a russet potato for a soup. I happen to like the flavor of a russet potato. I like the starchiness of a russet potato. However, a russet potato is going to break down quicker in your broth than, let's say, a Yukon Gold potato or a starchy potato, a not starchy potato like a red potato. Okay? The more starch it has in it, the more it's going to fall apart. The less starch in it, the more it's going to hold together. So it's completely up to you. I will tell you that the less starch that it has, the more flavor it has. So there's a little bit of give and take with both varieties. I do want to show you, everybody has a peeler at home, right? And you've probably always been wondering what this little thing is on your peeler. Every single peeler has one, okay? And you've probably never used it. You've probably never even considered what it was for. But let me show you what it's for. These little eyes that you get after you peel your potatoes, you use that little nifty thing to get right in there and it pops it right out, okay? So if you want a nice, clean, colored potato with all of the blemishes, that's how you remove those. If that's not that important to you, like for most people, then I wouldn't worry about it at all. It says to cut it into wedges, completely, once again, up to you how and what size you want to cut. I think we should cut the potato in half. I think we should cut the potato in half again, and then we're going to cut it into smaller wedges. Some potatoes are a little bit different sizes than others. You just want to make them equal. Okay, so once again, we're going to transfer our potatoes over. All right, our last ingredient, Spanish chorizo. What the recipe is calling for here is it's calling for a dried Spanish chorizo. There's a lot of choices of chorizo out there. There's Spanish chorizo, there's Mexican chorizo, there's Argentinian chorizo, there's Louisiana chorizo. This particular one is Spanish and it has a very unique flavor. There's literally 3 ingredients in this sausage. There's pork, there's salt, and then there's pork casings, and sometimes a little bit of garlic. And Spanish pimenton or paprika. That's literally all that's in this sausage, and it has a very unique flavor. All that I want you to do is just to cut these in rounds. It calls for 1 sausage. These sausages were a little bit small, and honestly, I love these. So I'm going to go a little bit heavier than what the recipe suggested. If you want to go a little bit heavier, even so, you're more than welcome to do that. And we're just going to add these sausages right into the soup as well, and we're going to let that simmer. How long? Until the potatoes are tender. Okay, the soup is cooked for 45 minutes already with just the garbanzo beans. I've tasted them. I know the beans are soft. We soaked them overnight. Now all we're doing is cooking this until the potatoes are tender.